Hello, it's Greg Chambers. Before I stick up the slides, I always like to put myself up here because I am live, and we'll get started here as people get loaded into the system right at 11. So hopefully the weather is springy where you are, because that's what we're experiencing here. It's like a heat wave after it was so cold before. Today, what we're going to be talking about is how to generate B2B leads on Facebook 2021, because that's what we have ahead of us, right? Is 2021. And as I was preparing this, one of the things that popped out, I'm going to share another screen here. I happened to get this in my inbox this morning, and it's Google to stop selling ads based on your specific web browsing. So one of the things that's happening inside of online advertising right now is this, right? This whole privacy thing. So they've been following for years, right? The platforms and advertisers especially have been chasing after the holy grail of let's find out, like if Greg Chambers, across all of his devices is going here, who is he really? And then can we tailor the ads to him specifically? And Facebook, Google, Apple to a degree, Amazon, right? They've acquired these giant databases, and now they're going to stop using them. So, the cynic in me is like, well, why are they going to stop? It's because they've got enough information that they can learn from the users. But there's also, oh, it looks like Bill's video is he in the car. Part of it is that the users, they've got enough information, right? And then they're applying all these AI tools to to advertising. Facebook doesn't really like this, and we'll get into knowing the reasons why. But as we're looking forward into this year, this stuff is becoming bigger and bigger, so big that it seems like it's pretty timely that we're looking at it right now. But let's jump into what we're going to be talking about today. So Facebook is in the news, just like Google is, just like everybody else is. So there's privacy things that they're popping into. We're seeing the radicalized groups, right? The Facebook is altering how we think and who we are. There's ad fraud on top of all that, right? So we're doing all this super targeting, and but in there, right? It's tools for advertisers, and that's what they've been telling us is, we can tell you exactly who it is, who's looking for life insurance today. But then it turns out that when the tools that they were using are maybe putting forth some fraudulent numbers as far as what the engagement with those ads really is. And the worst part about it is when you read these articles, it's like, oh my gosh, they know about it too. So why are we going to end up talking about this? We're going to talk about it for all the reasons that were in the email invite that we sent you guys, which is Facebook is still the largest, right? If there's a good chance that everybody that you're targeting is in Facebook. If we look at all the different platforms, we could probably find them in Facebook for sure. Now, finding them and advertising to them are two different things. But for B2B advertising, right, if all these tools have been built for consumers and trying to help with consumers, because consumer advertising is a little bit different, right? If we're marketing business to consumer, the days of the door-to-door salesperson for consumer goods are long past, right? The fuller brush salesperson is no longer coming around. But so that discipline relies a lot on advertising and these advertising tools, these marketing tools to bring their leads in. B2B, not so much, right? With B2B, we can rely more on how to on selling directly. And so in that direct sales environment, what is the role that these things play? And whenever I talk about Facebook, somebody will bring up, well, why bother with Facebook? Because LinkedIn, that's where all my people are, right? So isn't LinkedIn best for business to business anyways? I don't know if you guys have been playing with LinkedIn. We'll do another webinar on what we're finding inside of LinkedIn. But when we look at LinkedIn, the one thing is for bang for the budget, right? This is where the Facebook tool is still priced in such a way that when we're using it, we don't need a giant budget. Most of the people that we work with at Lead Gen Compass don't have big budgets. When I say big budget, what do I mean? We're not spending $20,000, $30,000 a month on social media or really many channels at all. So how is it that we can get the biggest bang? This is the problem that we're always trying to solve, is how do we find cost, where's a cost-effective lead source for our businesses that are marketing to other businesses. So why are we talking about Facebook? We're going to talk about Facebook for B2B advertising, because in the end, we're all consumers, right? If there's a way to generate interest so that I'm looking at a new car, there's probably a way to generate my interest so that I can buy a new piece of software for my company. So that's the backdrop to all of this. Today, then, let me give you a quick run through as to what we're going to be covering. We'll talk about Facebook, and Facebook. We will cover the Facebook tools. We'll talk about B2B lead generation specifically. So if you're, hopefully you're interested in that. And then we'll talk about what's working for us now, right? So this is based in our experience, is what you're going to get. And then there'll be a time for questions and answers. The best place to do questions and answers, as you see me looking at my screen, is the chat box. So we have, if I'm confused, Sarah does work in Facebook every day, and Sarah is going to help me answer some of these questions. But she's monitoring the chat box and also the Q&A. There's a Q&A button on there. Again, like one of the things that's changed from last year to this year is a lot of times we were spending our time instructing people how to use Zoom, and everybody does seem to know how to use Zoom. So use it however you're used to, and we will work with you however we can get your questions answered. If we don't know the answers, we will look it up and we'll get back to you. So 2021 is coming after 2020, right? So more people have been working from home, like I was just talking about with Zoom. More people are used to remote work. So it should be easier to reach decision makers. At least that's what we've been hearing. Our experience is, maybe is a little bit easier. And the buyers, right, who are consumers, are online a lot more, says all the stats, and they're consuming a lot of content, but it's all over the place. So how do you reach them when there's no longer a single channel, right? There's no longer one place where all of our people are gathering. There's no more single watering holes. We're going to talk about that as this webinar goes along. So, and Facebook can really help with reaching people wherever they are. But before we start, let's at least get on the exact same page. When I talk about Facebook's parts, we'll talk about how I describe those things. We'll talk about when I talk about decisions and how your customers are making decisions. We'll talk about what I mean there. And then we'll talk about your other ads, because ultimately you're going to find that when it comes to, from our experience in generating business to business leads, it really works well in conjunction if you're using Facebook with your other tools. So let's jump into the first part, Facebook parts. Are you all familiar? I don't know if you're familiar, if you've been playing inside the Facebook ad network, the ad tool, but inside the ad tool, most people get in there when the first time they're like, wow, this is really complicated. It's even more complicated than you think. Every time you make a choice, it seems like another menu opens. In this case, there's a place for placements. So Facebook will default to, hey, you should use these automatic placements. We'll just tell you where to go. Don't worry about it. We've got really smart computers on the back end that will help you in this. Works pretty well with consumer advertising, business to consumer stuff, a lot of transactions, big audiences. Business to business, not so much. So what we like to do when we talk about Facebook's and where your ads are going, we actually, when you click on the manual placement button, it opens up a giant menu. And the platforms that we look at when we think about Facebook, there's Facebook itself. So there's Instagram, which I'm sure most of you know. There's WhatsApp, which doesn't really have advertising. It's not supposed to. Messenger, the Facebook Messenger tool, and then the audience network. So occasionally we will talk to people about B2B advertising and how we're going to be using Facebook. And they will say, I'm not on Facebook. I hate Facebook. I'm never there. I don't think, and I'm pretty representative of my buyers. They're not on there either. When we talk about Facebook, we're not only talking about the Facebook interface and where you share your photos and interact with your family and friends that you haven't seen in 20 years. We're not really even talking about Instagram unless you're super visual and have some of those assets available to you. We're probably talking about the audience network. And what the audience network is that Facebook has rented all this property across the web. So if you have been matched, and everybody for the most part has been matched inside of Facebook somewhere, even if you don't have a profile, you have a profile somewhere in their network. And if they can match you up to that inside of Facebook, inside of their giant database, they can show you ads not on Facebook, but wherever you are on the web. So for instance, when I'm looking at my local newspaper, because we have a big breaking news story happening with my basketball team, and when that's going, there's ads that are running on the side. Facebook rents some of those spaces out, so you can access those through the Facebook audience network ads. And so when I'm talking about the parts, I'm usually referring to, we use Facebook, obviously we'll use the Facebook interface itself, the Facebook tool, but really the audience network, I think, is probably the thing that I talk the most about. So if you're thinking, well, what is he talking about when he's referring to where these ads are running? That's what I'm referring to is if we can match you up inside of Facebook's big database, they can find Greg Chambers. They can also find all the places that I am around the web, right? On the back end, it's doing a quick match every time I load a new page on the internet. And that's the thing that Google's getting rid of, right? So changes are afoot, and we'll talk about what that means to us as we go forward too. So when I talk about Facebook's parts, I'm referring to more than just the Facebook tool, the place where you share your photos. The other thing I talk a lot about with customers is their customer decision process. How is it that we are helping them make a decision to interact with our company, right? To choose our products and services. And there's one approach, which is go to Facebook and learn about and figure out all their tools, and let's figure out how to use them inside of our sales process. And then the other way is to really map out, this is what our sales process is, this is our customer's decision process, and where is it that Facebook can enhance parts of that process. Like I said, we find most business to business lead generation relies a lot less on marketing and more on sales activity, as opposed to consumer, which could be the other way around. So knowing how it is that your customers are interacting, right? Your salespeople or your sales team are interacting with the market that they're going after, gets us into what we can do inside of Facebook. So is it best pre-call, where we can build awareness before the rep is calling into the company or introducing the product? Is it after the introduction that it works better? Is it to help the rep in decision support? Is it that there's a ton of decision makers that we need to deal with, and each one has their own unique set of decision criteria that we're trying to help them with? Facebook, when you approach it from that sense, like this is, if we could just get a little help here, it would, help our sales process all the way along. That's where we find Facebook has the biggest impact in B2B lead generation. So I knew this picture was coming in. I was thinking about it, so I was trying to hold off on it. But the third thing, so the third part of that, right? One is, what is the big Facebook network that I'm referring to? It generally is the audience network. The second thing is we're trying to match it up inside of your sales, your decision process that your customers are using. And then the third thing is that we know Facebook is probably not the number one avenue to generate leads. And so all the other activity that you're doing, it will enhance it. If we do it correctly. So, and here's how I know that is a long time ago. And if you've ever watched these webinars before, every once in a while, you'll hear me reference, I worked with a Hawaiian shirt company, right? So we sold Hawaiian shirts online. And one of the things that the way we drove most of our advertising was people searching Google for Hawaiian shirts. And they come in, buy a Hawaiian shirt. And so when Facebook first was opened up for advertising, we were all over it because we thought, new channel, we should really be using this tool, and we'd run all these ads, right? Because you could target by like Jimmy Buffett or Hawaii or tequila consumer, people who liked these things. You could build these affinity groups, and then you could run these fun ads, and we'd see all this interaction with these ads, but we didn't see it show up in sales, right? In Google, you could at least see, like I paid for this many clicks, it ended up with this many sales. So what we'd end up doing is turning it off, and then we'd get inspired and we'd turn it on again and we'd turn it off. As we were going through that, one of the things that popped up is every time we turned it on, the conversion rate for Google improved. So inside of analytics, we could never hook these things up. But one of the things we started referring to it as was the seasoning. So Facebook became the seasoning. We knew roughly what the audience was. If we could raise awareness with that audience, it seemed to be making an impact, a measurable impact on a transaction, right? Those were $50 transactions. So they weren't like our B2B, but we've carried that over into the way we use it for generating B2B ads right now. So if you think of it as this is going to be the seasoning for the other ads that we're running, that's now you're close to thinking as I'm thinking. So those are like the three pieces of the framework that I'm going to be working with then as I share these ideas. And I ended up just limiting it to 5 ideas for 2021. So if there's any questions, you can throw it into the panel, but otherwise I'm just going to keep on moving. Inside of Facebook, as we've been talking about, since everybody is inside of Facebook, what we're hoping to do is match up our buyers that into their tool. So they call those audiences. And so we use audiences a lot, and we suggest you do the exact same thing. So the most common audiences that we use are, if you look over on that side, it's where I did the create audience button, drops down. Custom audiences is the #1 tool that we use. There's lookalike audiences and special ad audiences. Lookalike audiences get a lot of play in marketing circles. They tend to need it tends to be consumer. Most of the examples are really based on consumer transactions. When we look for B2B examples in there, we don't see them as much. So we end up with the ones that we use the very most are the website. So any visitors to your website, you can put those into an audience, find a match. So people come to your website, they visit they pick up a pixel. Facebook says, oh, by the way, that's Greg Chambers. And so now Greg Chambers is part of the website visitors audience, and we can run advertising to that audience. The other one is the customer lists. So your internal customer lists, your prospect lists, those are the ones we use the most because we can build the exact same kind of audience. So if you're familiar with our US farm data, inside of if we know who the corn farmers are, we can find an audience so that we can match them up inside. So we know that they're in the US farm data database as farm growers or as corn growers. And then we can find a match inside there, inside of Facebook. Because I see we get, there's already a question in here that is, in my opinion, is Facebook the best way to reach farmers? So he runs a business called RoofMax. It's using an innovative soybean product to want to educate farmers to grow soybeans. It's missing some information. So Dean, to answer your question, what we can do there is what we're trying to do is just this, right? We can find some of them inside of Facebook, and then we can help raise awareness. So you're selling, it sounds like a new product, right? And it's a new audience. So it's not an existing product to people that have already purchased similar things before. This is something new for them to consider. So one of your battles, right, is that you're constantly trying to raise awareness. So is Facebook the best way to reach farmers? I don't know if I would go that far. It is a way, right? It's a way inside of a mix. And one of the ways to do it is to use these tools, the audience tools. So plug them in so that the people that are curious enough, where you've been able to drive enough awareness to get them to your website, you can get them, run ads to them, right? As the Patriot, that quote from the Patriot movie, aim small, miss small. The smaller our target audience is, and the more we know about them. Like, I know you came to the website, and I know you consumed a couple pages. You can even build audiences around people who consume, are visiting very specific pages. When you know who those people are, you can talk to them a little bit differently in your advertising, right? You don't need to be as general. And when we do that, that's the easiest way to get the biggest bang from the advertising spend that you do inside of Facebook. So I hope I've answered that question as best as meets your expectations. So for everybody else who's listening, it's that same thing, right? If you're using audiences, Sorry, this thing, education. So yes, Dean is agreeing with me. It's live. Sorry, as I get through this. If your lookalike audience is very small. Yeah, so Barbara brings up a good question. Barbara asks, if the lookalike audience is very small, how do you narrow the audience? This is one of the challenges that we find inside of Facebook for B2B. B2B audiences tend to be a lot smaller than consumer audiences. It isn't just like everybody in Denver, Colorado who's interested in skiing, right? That's a giant audience. But if we get very specific as to the number of people who can use a pump, it's just not a huge audience, and there may be a few players, and it's a very complex sale. So how is it that we use the support? Finding the audience, finding that target inside of Facebook, we think is a challenge, as it looks like you do too. So what we try to use Facebook for is to help support other ways of reaching them, because we know like they'll ask your target audience probably asks specific questions of Google. And so maybe we can find them in there, get them to your website, and then use retargeting ads so that we can continue the conversation with them until they get to the point where they can make a call. So Barbara, I hope that helps with that. But this is the challenge inside of Facebook, right? Is this big audience. Everybody's in there, but how is it that we carve these people out and do it in a way where Facebook, will run the ads, right? Because if the audience is too small, Facebook, the robot doesn't even bother trying. A lot of times they still do run them, right? And if the ads work where they can charge you for the clicks, you'll find that those ads can still run even if they tell you that the audience is too small. But one of our challenges is that we need to build up bigger audiences inside of Facebook for it to be effective, and so that we can actually use the tools. Website visitors seems to be the exception on that, where we can at least find a they're at least run the ads in that way. So that's audiences. So use your audiences. The next thing I want to talk about is ads, because inside of ads, one of our other challenges that we find when we're trying to develop business to business leads inside of Facebook, one of the big challenges is that ads have a really short life. Like there are some things that we can do out there. Once we get the ads set, we can just run it, right? You can do that set it and forget it thing. In Facebook, it seems to be that people are interacting with the tool so much and with the ads so much that variety is the spice of ad success, as I just said as of this morning. We need to run multiple variations of as many variations of the ad. Now, the good news is that they've built some tools for us, right? Where we can upload multiple pictures. They have carousels. They have the robot will help us run some of these ads and make better ads. The challenge is it's just tough to come up with all that, with all those assets, right? And so again, that's why we end up using Facebook in support of our other B2B lead generation efforts as much as possible. And one of the things that I used to always harp on was they used to give us access to this reach and frequency. So we could say, like, I don't want somebody to see the same ad more than a couple times a day. Because what was happening is you get like, oh, there's 10,000 impressions, and then the reach is like 100 people, and you're like, oh my gosh, do each of those people see the ad 1,000 times or 500 times? And it may have actually been that way. And so there was a place in there where you can run limits. Sarah can correct me if it's still there somewhere. I couldn't find it this morning. It looks like they've made it so it's like a high ad. You have to spend a lot of money to have access to a tool like that. Our goal is to do that, though, right? We just want to, over time, we want to raise awareness. So we want to get in front of people a little bit over a long period of time, as opposed to just going a mile deep on one day, like buy today, buy now. A lot of our B2B stuff doesn't have that advantage. We can't do it that way. So what we need to do is we can slow our flow, so to speak, by putting a bunch of parameters in there. So what are the things that we can do? We can run fewer ads if we're making some for mobile, some for desktop, as a for instance. We can run different ads if you do multiple formats and run it inside the audience network. And Facebook will help you build the right formats on there. and I'll read this question in just a little bit, Dean. The and if there's anything that we've learned is that the more you can change the ad up, the better it will be over time. So I don't know if it's part of it is the robot that makes that choice, or if it really is the consumers just need to see multiple variations of the ad before they get to see it. And on the consumer side, there's a lot of work that gets done creating a ton of ads, and it's not always just for testing, right? It's not A/B testing. A lot of times your A/B test wins, but then you got to pull the B right back in, the non-winner, just to get that response rate back up. And so if you are making ads, don't make just one, or have your people, whoever's making the ad, show you that they're making multiple variations, or they're getting in there multiple times to change the ad up during the course of the campaign. So that's the second thing that we can tell you. And then video ads. So is there an ad that works better than other ads? Video ads, yes. So video ads work better, and that's even including the fraud numbers that they were telling us before. The fraud numbers really weren't all that much higher, but still, you shouldn't lie to your advertisers, right? The challenge with video ads is, if regular ads, it takes a lot of time and effort to produce multiple images, to produce multiple ad copy, to always be changing up the ad. Video ads are even harder. The good news about video ads is that they do seem to, they are closer to set it and forget it than the text and image-based ads used before. And so why is that? I don't know. There's, maybe it's motion, maybe it's something to do with those. And when I look at because I'm always scouring the web for B2B lead generation success stories, and the success stories that seem to pop up over and over again are some form of brand awareness. So getting back to Dean's question, Dean's original question, when you're raising awareness, oftentimes these education, right? You can do education inside of short snippets, or at least teasers that get people over to the website inside of Facebook. So the challenge is still making sure that you're in front of the right audience, but maybe you can raise awareness inside of with those. And one of the things that works, and Facebook knows this, so they will automatically load captions, but you can make videos yourself with captions. So anytime that you can use captions, it helps, it works, because it's, again, I don't know, I'm going to say it's something to do with motion, right? Predatory drift, or predator drift, whatever we got from the wolves. Are we descendants of wolves? The just seeing anything that's movement tends to attract our eye. And there is a tool that we were playing with, and I'd recommend that you mess around with it too, because there is some, I think there's a free version that you can do before, and it really works off podcasts. So this Economist ad, which is a successful ad to get in subscribers for The Economist, again, right? Business to consumer. So take that with a grain of salt. But that ad is strictly, Anna Wintour is pretty iconic, but that little sound bar just moves up and down as she's being interviewed, and the text scrolls underneath it. And Headliner is the tool that they built that in. And so we've played with it. It's pretty easy. You can turn a podcast, you can turn a phone interview, you can turn some form of audio into a video that works for ads. So we'd suggest that. Dean's question is, do you offer FaceTime advertising services to people who are listening, or are you just giving the how-to education? And we do, yeah, and so we do these educational things ourselves, Dean, for the same reason, right? I'm happy to share all this information with you. Most people need things that are a lot more specific to their business, and then we offer those services. And if you don't mind looking at us, we can even do FaceTime bits on there. And so another question came in. This one's from Paul, and Paul asked about janitorial facility services and COVID-19 disinfection. So yeah, big, right? How do you get the word out that these things are happening, and then how do you maybe even demonstrate? So video ads would be a place that you could possibly go to if you have some footage that could be morphed into these ads. And then the challenge is still getting them in front of the right audience. Sometimes in commercial cleaning, we have the advantage of certain zip codes are pretty dense. So let's jump into the next piece here, because this is one of the strategies that we figured out over time, is that sometimes the audience, right, the audience visiting the website is too small to run ads to. The challenge is we still can't get people to the website. Sometimes the challenge is the matches in the audience that we're finding inside of Facebook aren't big enough. And so what we can do is you can knock down by radius and by zip code, and you can even knock down by radius and then exclude zip codes so that you can really target these areas. And so if you were trying to run, I'm imagining a demonstration of like a workstation being disinfected with some text running on it underneath it, a short video, click to learn more, where you could start to demonstrate. It's almost an education video, Paul, would be an idea, again, just off the top of my head. But the using those, getting those in front of the audience, but then also just maybe targeting an area. So a downtown zip code that has a predominance of what do you call it? Office buildings or places that need to be disinfected, as an example. And then what you can do is when you're looking for those locations, you can click into this locations bit and you can target them based on like people that are recently in that location, people who live in that location, or people who travel in this location. We've used this successfully for daycares, by the way. Just they only work in a certain part of town, so we're trying to move the catch the people that are not only living in the area, but people who are traveling through, who maybe the daycare is convenient for. But the saturation method, when you run display ads, the nice thing about Facebook is it can be a little bit cheaper than something like LinkedIn, or even, and then a little bit, you can do better branding than you can on something like Google. So that's how we would do it, right? Is we would test this out looking for some form of lift inside of a market, but you can saturate an area. So a lot of the brand lift success stories, again, some of these you have to take with a grain of salt because the budgets are big, but they are able to demonstrate lift and raising awareness. And how is it that they measure those things? That's kind of the other trick, right? Is knowing what your measurements are before you start running these campaigns, and then where you think that number is going to pop up that indicates, yeah, this is a leading indicator that we're at least on the right track, or and not just the lagging indicator, right? My problem with the Hawaiian shirt bit was we were always looking at the lagging indicator, which was when did the cash register till ring? And a lot of times we probably should have been looking a little further upstream for indicators that people were at least being introduced to the brand, working on that. So I've talked a lot about case studies. So everybody's business is different. And when you look up things like this is from Facebook, where you can look up Facebook's advertising success stories. And then you can say, I want the objective to be lead generation. And it will pop up 130 results. And you think, man, that's great, right? The problem is that when you start reading through these, most of these examples are business to consumer. So when I knocked it all the way down to, I just want the B2B lead generation stories, there's 2 results. One of the results isn't really a B2B. It's still like business to consumer. So, or they're very small businesses where I'm selling a marketing class. And so it's really it's almost a consumer transaction, even though it's all about business. So when you're out looking for these things, dig in a little deeper to make sure that you're getting the ad. It's useful to look at what the consumers are doing, just because maybe you can translate it back out to, this is what I think that we should be doing, or how we could use that, or how we could tailor that to our business. But looking for big examples. What's happening here is, and it may be just confirmation bias, but I bump into a lot of success stories from B2B marketing on Facebook, B2B lead generation on Facebook. And it's the same thing that we've just been talking about. It's really good for raising awareness. And then it's really good for following people around once we've already identified who they are. Let's see. Rochelle has a question. So how do you compel people to make the link from the ad to the website? I have great reaches, but getting potential clients to navigate is difficult. Yes. So huge problem, right? So what the way I'm interpreting this, Rochelle, is we build a great ad, and then Facebook gives us these stats that show like all this interaction is happening with it, but they don't seem to be going any further into the process. Maybe they're not even making it to the website from internally, right? Inside of Facebook. Things to test along there are, if you've tried it, we've had some success getting immediate responses if somebody can monitor Facebook Messenger. If somebody's on Facebook, they see the ad, they interact with it, they have a question, and they can get an instant answer. You can get a little further with those transactions. The challenge is that somebody needs to be monitoring Facebook all the time, right? So for a lot of businesses that we work with, it's a non-option. The other thing is that we stopped asking it to do that. We stopped asking it to drive traffic to the website, knowing that wherever people are, that's where they should be. Going from Facebook to a website, it always seems to be really hard. If you're using one of those other networks, like the Audience Network, which is outside of Facebook, driving to your website, you may find some more success. You may find some more success there. I hope that helps a little bit. But it is a challenge. The good news is that you get some interaction, and that is being viewed and it's being run. That's usually the first step in troubleshooting how to get people in. But if we use it for something like maybe brand awareness, what kind of intermediates am I referring to? So if we use it, so instead of jumping from the Facebook ad into the website, so when I talked about intermediates, that's my internal code for myself of intermediate steps in the customer decision-making process. So instead of trying to move them too far down the decision tree, right? If it's AIDA or whatever the model is that you use, maybe it's just awareness to maybe generating a little bit of interest as opposed to action there at the bottom of the funnel. So that's why I talk about those intermediate steps. Maybe if we asked Facebook to help us just with some of those intermediate steps, and we find awareness is really a good one. Because I'll give you an example of how to measure that too. If you have Google Ads running on your company name, which I know it annoys everybody to pay for their company name, but the good news is that Google gives you, since they're running ads on your company name, you get a pretty good number of impressions, an accurate number of impressions of how many times people are typing in that name. So if you're running an ad branding, an awareness lift campaign in Facebook, one of the places you can go to measure it is in impressions from your Google ad campaign on your name. So the number of times that people are actually searching for your business. But that would be like, that's an early stage. We're not getting them to the website, but we're just trying to make them aware of, this is who Greg Chambers is. Up here, you need to be more aware of him, and then a way to measure, is that working at all? And is it fitting the ad spend? So I hope that's helpful on that, because these are big problems, right? These are big challenges. So, and then find the budget. So again, going back to this, how when we're looking at businesses that are successful, we work with some attorneys, and when we get these pitches, like here's an attorney that's being super successful with ads, and so that's even on a business to consumer standpoint. And that attorney, they're saying you need to do the exact same thing. When I look at the ad budget that they're suggesting for a lot of our attorneys, so some of our attorneys are only spending $1,000 a month on ads, like their whole ad budget. And these people are suggesting that maybe you could spend up to $10,000 a week on Facebook to drive ads. It doesn't always fit into our business model. So it's one thing to peek at, to check and double check like what kind of budget that is, and then what is it that we can expect on a scaled down version where we don't get that all the pickup from all the extra spend that's on there. So good stuff. All right, so I try to keep these to under 45 minutes. So let's do a quick review. Before you jump in, right, before listening to any advice that we give, we want to make sure that you're on the same page with us when it comes to this. Knowing the parts of Facebook and what each of the ad networks inside of Facebook, where they reach and where to best direct your ad spend, helps a lot with lead generation. Knowing the decision process of your customer and where it is that you can insert ads that might help impact that, right? It's like, we know that our close rate is 12% and it should be a little bit higher. Let's move it up a couple steps, like, well, is it presentations? Is it this? And then maybe right around there, we can find some ways to advertise on Facebook where we can find the matches for the people that are in our decision funnels and help there. And then we know that Facebook by itself, for most of our business to business, especially larger ticket decisions, it doesn't work great by itself. It works great when we combine it with other tactics. And then the 5 ideas we talked about were audiences, right? So make sure that you have your audiences set up. Audiences to us, the most popular ones are people who visit the website, and any of our like internal customer lists are good to segment inside of Facebook and then only run ads to them. Whenever you make ads, lots of variety inside the ads. And the next one, videos. If you can do videos, they work pretty well. It requires a little bit of production value or production time to put those things together, but even bad ones seem to get a pretty decent lift. Saturate a market. If it's hard to find your buyers and you do have geography working in your favor, maybe there's a way to raise awareness by saturating a market. And then when you bump into these case studies, all the people who tell you that Facebook's the greatest thing for advertising ever, go deep with those and dig them up. And if you find any really good ones, share them with us, because we're always looking for those too. So what do you do next? So you've listened to Greg for 45 minutes. What is it that you would do? These are the things that I think are the most helpful when we're working with anybody, when we're trying to solve any of these problems. A decent map, roadmap of how our customers are making their decisions, and setting up custom audiences, again, the website visitors, and then any of our people that are currently either in process or are already customers of ours. And then having a good tracking system in place so that when we are playing with these Facebook ads, we can see where the ad is actually having an impact. So we can, before we get started, right, we can say, we'd love to see a lift. Like right now, we're getting 50 searches on our name every month. We'd love to see that get up to 100. So let's run these campaigns towards that. It's a super early indicator, right? There's no revenue that's attached to that necessarily, but at least people can start working through. We know that we're on the right track and that the advertising is helping us, because it tends to add up over time, right? It's not a one-time thing. Questions. So we've answered, looks like half a dozen questions. And we've got Paul asking, so we mentioned budget dollars. Is there a recommended monthly? And did we advertise for this webinar on Facebook? So we did. If you saw our ads on Facebook, it was probably because you were part of our databases, Go Leads, US Farm Data. So if you've interacted with one of our lists companies and ended up on our database, and we found a match for you inside of Facebook, those audiences did receive an advertisement for this webinar. And then is there, budget dollars, like what is a recommended budget? A recommended budget is always tough for any of these things, because when you're first building a campaign, you tend to spend a portion of the budget on just learning how it is to work. So recommended budget, we usually start on the back end as to if a service is $1,000 and we're willing to pay $100 for a customer that spends $1,000 on this service, that is right. That becomes cost per acquisition, like an ideal cost per acquisition. And then we work backwards from there into the ad budget, so that we at least know if we have $500 to dedicate towards this problem, we should be expecting at least X amount of, like, our close rate is 10%. So, to spend our $100, we need to get whatever that is. I'm bad at the super fast math, but we work backwards into a budget. Or if somebody comes to us with a direct budget, we work that direct budget forward, trying to, asking about the cost per acquisition, so that we can at least start to gauge what success looks like on the front end. So Paul, I know that budget always sounds like it's a avoidance question. You need to spend some money, and then whatever the monthly budget is. So if somebody gives me $1,000 monthly budget that they're willing to spend, I tell them that it's going to probably take $2,000 for us to get on track. It usually we're much faster than that, but if they were doing it by themselves, it absolutely is they're going to spend all of that before it starts to, you see your activity start to bring that average cost per action down. So I hope I answered that question correctly. And then Rochelle asks, I found this webinar via email blast. Do you find email more effective than Facebook ads? Yes. For driving people to action, anytime you can build your email list, you're going to get a much bigger response from email. So I would say, I don't know how many, Sarah would have to tell me how many people were registered for this, but let's say it's 50, 60 people. The vast majority of those came from previous contacts for this, as opposed to knowing about us cold. But that being said, we just don't advertise this. This is really a service for 80. So 88, one came from the advertising. So there you go. So Sarah, thank you for the number. But yeah, if anytime you can get your list going, you're always going to get better results from that over time. The problem is it costs money to build that list, right? So ways we can help Lead Gen Compass. So back to Dean's original question, we like in this case, tracking and reporting. We help you set those things up, audience setups, ad creation, and campaign strategy. We're happy to help with any of those things. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for all the questions. Dean, is there an updated list? And yeah, Dean, we will follow up with you on that. Whoever you talk to, probably Susan, we'll have Susan double check on that list and get back to you with updates on that list. So I'm sure Sarah has probably seen that. And perfect, thanks. You're welcome. And if you have any other questions, or you need examples that are specific to your business, feel free to email us, info@leadgencompass.com, and we can come up with examples that are more specific to your business, as well as recommendations that are more specific. We're happy to do that. So thanks again. It's Wednesday, noon here in Omaha. So thanks for your attention, and we will talk to you later.